Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FTU Life After the Military. I'm your host, Tony Rodriguez, and today I'm joined by Tony Demaio. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and Tony, you're out of California, I see.
Yeah. We're down in Palm Springs, California,
Okay.
and we're enjoying some cool weather right now. It's in the 90s.
Yeah, that was my summer out here in North Carolina, and it's recently dropped down to a nice, pleasant 75 degrees over the
Yeah.
past 3 weeks.
Now, at this time of year, it's usually in the 110, 115, something like that.
Yeah.
Makes it a little hot when you're out there golfing, but now when you're out there, it's nice. I think the highest it's getting right now is 100. We got a nice little breeze, so it's good.
All right, Tony. So I brought you on, or you asked to be on the podcast because um, topic that's near and dear to me, veterans' mental health, suicide prevention. And can you just tell me a little bit about, I guess, your organization and how you go about, like, I guess, supporting or trying to help veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. Helping Heroes USA, I founded that back in 2017, and back in about 2015, I started working in the suicide prevention space. And at that time, I was a consultant to an organization called Project Hero. And we did cycling events. And we'd get 150, 200 veterans, and we'd ride different legs around the country. So, like, we'd go from San Antonio, Texas to Houston, Jacksonville, Florida, Atlanta. We'd do about 800,000-mile legs at a time. And the whole purpose of doing that was to work with vets and work with getting people out of isolation. In this whole world of suicide, one of the worst things that happens is somebody gets isolated. They get isolated, they withdraw, and then they go into depression. And from depression, then comes drugs and alcohol, and then suicide. So in 2017, when I started helping heroes, it was to really broaden the spectrum of what we do as activities to be able to take and to help get people out of isolation. One of the things that I noticed along the way was that there's been a lot of money spent on research, and there's some peer-to-peer programs out there. But to me, it needs to be a broader net. So we've looked at empowering communities to be able to identify people that are at risk for taking their life. And so we created some symposiums. We've got workshops. I've got a book coming out on it, and that addresses family, friends of veterans, responders, law enforcement. And what we're doing is we're giving people a way to identify, to kind of get their radar up, to create an awareness that there's people out there walking around and they're at risk. And I've got a book coming out in about 2 weeks. It's called Silent Battle, and it's about the way people get into the silent battle and they start to withdraw. And so, looking at some of the signs. So what we teach is looking at the signs, seeing who's at risk, then how to engage into a conversation, how to approach that subject, and then looking at how can I refer them and get additional help or create a support group and help that person stay with them. So that's really what our mission is, and there's all kinds of ways that we approach this. What we really want to do is we create what we call support angels. We want to go into communities. That's what we're doing, and getting people to understand the statistics behind it. One of the horrific statistics is there's a suicide every 11 minutes. And from each suicide, there's about 135 people that are affected. It really throws a net, and people go into depression. So, number one is looking at what are some of the drivers behind somebody wanting to take their life by suicide, and what things happen, and how can you recognize this? So that's really the first step is to be able to identify if somebody's at risk and get your radar up. So things that happen sometimes for people, there's a stage where some folks will start giving away some of their things, and that's an indicator. I have a story about a lady that her husband was a very decorated law enforcement, and she noticed that he was starting to give away some of the awards and medals and things that he he had gotten. And at that point, she just approached him, and why are you doing this? And it was because he was kind of starting to go on that path of getting things in order. So that's one sign. Another sign is when people start getting their financial situation in order. It might be like they create a will or a trust or something, but they're starting to do that, to get things in order. Another sign is that their personal appearance or personal hygiene, they just let it go. And, they don't start taking care of themselves. They start getting in isolation. So we want people to be sensitive to these changes that are taking place in their friends and their loved ones, and then how to approach it. There's a stigma out there and some misinformation that if you approach somebody and you ask them if they had thoughts of suicide or something, that's going to cause them to commit, suicide, and that's not true. It's not all of a sudden going up to somebody and asking them, and then that pushes them over the edge. The reality is, for a lot of people, it's the ability to talk about what's driving them, whether it's a financial situation that's driving them. We work a lot of guys that have just come back from being deployed, and there's a few things that happen. One is that they've experienced an atrocity that they don't want to share, and they keep reliving it over and over again. Sometimes there's something they've been asked to do that goes against their core values, and they didn't want to do that, and that haunts them, and they keep living with that. We have a situation where this happens quite a bit. Somebody's come back from being employed, maybe they have PTSD. They can't find a job, and then they end up getting a divorce. Then they get into child custody battles, and they're paying for attorneys, and they're not able to keep up with their child support. So there's a lot of things that are compounding the situation. But if you listen and you get an awareness of it, you can maybe help head that off. So that's what our organization is about. And we like to bolt up against professionals are out there. We like people to refer. I may have somebody on my radar that I think's at risk, and I'm just maybe not the right person to work with them. So maybe if I create a support group, or maybe I get somebody else, then that's the way that I can help save them, as opposed to feeling the burden all like I've got to do it myself.
Right. No, that's great. That's great to hear. So what I've noticed as well, because you mentioned people coming back from deployment, and that's so true, right? I saw it during my military career, but now that I'm retired, what I've seen guys that were going 1,000 miles an hour during their military career, and then they retire, and everything that they held in catches up with them because they don't have that distraction in the military anymore.
Right. You're absolutely right. And then one of the things I like to bring up, and I get asked this all the time, I get asked about my service career. And I tell people that I am not a veteran. I'm very active. I'm a retired officer in the American Legion because they have a sons program. So my dad was in the Navy. But I think what's important about that is what I learned about me not being a veteran. So when I was doing the cycling events, and we would ride, let's say we go out and we're going to ride 60, 100 miles a day, and I'd pull up next to a vet, and we'd start talking, and I would just listen. And I found that they were appreciative of the fact that I was listening to them. And it didn't matter if I was a veteran or not. I was really apprehensive when we first started of whether or not I was going to be accepted, so to speak, and guys were going to want to talk to me. But I found out that really they're appreciative of anybody that's there to help. And so the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of times somebody doesn't want to talk to a first responder, doesn't want to talk to a veteran, or afraid to talk to them because they say, hey, I wasn't a vet, so I don't really understand what they're going through. You really don't have to. You just have to listen. It's not a thing to be in judgment. You're not judging what they went through. You're listening because that's a healing process for them. And so I always bring that up when I'm talking to people that I think that was almost an advantage for me to be able to share that with other folks, to encourage them to reach out. So when we talk about first identifying who's at risk and looking at all the identifiers, and this is things that we teach. The other thing is how do we then engage them in a conversation and to be able to listen to them compassionately and not have judgment. So to be able to maybe ask a question that says, Antonio, are you okay? I'm just concerned about you. As opposed to saying, I've noticed your behavior lately and I don't think you're okay. So it's like, don't be combative, just your concern for them is maybe you see something a little off or something like that. You don't need to point that out. Just, are you all right? And then if they say, well, I'm stuck. I don't see it light at the end of the tunnel or, something like that. Then to follow up and say, what's causing it? What do you think is the root of that? What's causing you to feel that way? And then they'll share that. And then at that point, it's to get in a discussion and kind of take their temperature of where they are in that thought process. Is, you're thinking about suicide. Is that something that's imminent? Or no, I just kind of thought about it. The other thing is what do they have? Firearms, especially for veterans, first responders, law enforcement, there's a lot more firearms around. Firearms are one of the number one methods for taking one's life. So if they do have a firearm and they are thinking about that, there's a couple of things you need to do. If you can get it into a gun safe, then maybe you have the combination or a friend has the combination. They don't have access to it right away. Or can you get that gun from them? Can you make it so it's not so convenient? And this is the point here also when you realize somebody using drugs or alcohol, that distorts their view. Your guard goes down. And that's when things will happen. It'll be a combination of drug, alcohol, and a firearm. That's like the worst. So how do we get help for them? How do we refer them out to somebody? There's a lot of organizations out there. The suicide hotline, the 988, that's one way. The other, there's 12,000 American Legion posts around the country that deal with veterans. So if you're not a vet and you got a friend that's a vet or you are a vet, you can always get to one of those. If it's a first responder or a firefighter, I guarantee you, if you roll into a local fire station and say, hey, I've got a friend that's an ex-fireman and he's thinking about taking his life, you're going to get some help right away. Because they're there to save lives, right? So it's a call to action for them. So in our world, it's just making more people aware, realizing that the only way we're really going to mitigate these suicide attempts and suicides is to get a community that's understanding what's going on. And we give a lot of statistics. We give out statistics on, there's different in industries that have a higher rate of suicide. The medical industry has a higher rate of suicide. Of course, we have veterans and first responders. That's the highest. But then contractors, construction. We are actually doing symposiums for the Association of Builders and Contractors. We go right into their facilities because there's a very high rate. You can see where guys can be isolated all day long. They can work on a project, they can be sitting on a cat, and they can be isolated the entire day. And it's pretty easy to sneak a bottle out there or do whatever, and it kind of distorts their view. You need to stay away from depression because the self-talk and depression is what takes you to the next step.
Yeah. So Tony, what I noticed, you're talking about first responders and veterans, and just what I think about that group of people is it's difficult to ask for assistance, right? Because you're always a person that everything rests on your shoulder, right? Even for me in the military, right? So I was a team sergeant and then a first sergeant, and then I was still a father and a husband here. So I had just responsibility lumped on me day and night. And so how do I ask for assistance? Even for my physical injuries in the military, you're told, well, if you can fight through it, then keep going, keep pushing through. So you talking about reaching out is very important.
That's a very, very good point. And that's huge. And so, somebody may be a friend, like you don't want to burden, this is what happens a lot. You feel like you don't want to burden your family. And you maybe don't want to go to a peer because either it's what your level was, or else you're at a point where you don't want to. There's a stigma. It's looking for help. It's a weakness. So, but there may be somebody in your universe that you can talk to, and that's what we're looking at. There might be a friend. Um, we have groups down here like, we've got a group of vets that get together on Tuesday mornings for a coffee at McDonald's. Kind of gives them accountability and a place to go. And I'll go into that group, and because I'm not a veteran, because I don't have any rank, I'll find that guys want to talk to me. I want to pull you aside. They want to talk to you. So I think that's a real advantage. So that's why in our world, the more people that we can create, the more support angels we can put out there, the more people that can identify the people at risk. I think that's the way we're going to help solve this. There's things that happen in people's life. There's events that will cause them to start going down a path. You have a group that will lose a loved one. And they might be married 10 years, they might be married 40 years, but now that person's alone and they're isolated. And that's one of the drivers. You might have somebody that's chronic pain. That's another one. What we're seeing in the younger generation is that bullying, they're being bullied on social media, they're being bullied at school, and that has driven up the rate among teenagers that have death by suicide. And, or at that point, they medicate or they take drugs, and that creates them coming to the end. So those are things that we're just wanting to get out to the population to be aware of. And what we hate is when we hear from somebody that says, if I only had known, if I only had known that person was suffering. And that's true. There's just no place in our society right now that makes people aware of what the signs are. And that's what we're doing. We're just creating awareness out there, giving people tools to be able to act. And it may not be tomorrow that you have somebody, but it might be somebody comes across your radar 6 months from now. And they're very subtle sometimes. I had I was cycling with a group of guys, and we'd ride every Saturday, and we'd ride like 60 miles, and then we'd come back to the parking lot and load our bikes in the car. And one of the guys we rode with, he said, "Hey, I want to take a bunch of guys, I'll take you guys to lunch." I thought, well, that's strange. And he says, well, it might be the last time we get together. Boy, was that a red flag. That was a red flag. And so about 4 of us got together and we went to lunch and started talking. And for me, I didn't have the awareness. I would have, I got something to do today. I would have blown it off. So that's all we're asking. We're asking for people to be aware and listen what somebody's saying to you. In our symposiums or workshop, we actually work on listening skills. When somebody's explaining to you, if they're in a situation or they feel there's no hope, they're really not asking you to solve the problem for them. They're just asking you to listen and not be judgmental. The worst thing you can do is be judgmental and say, well, you're just doing that to get attention. People have said that to people. You're just looking for a way out. Don't be in judgment. Just listen. And that's essentially the role of our mission. That's our company, is to do that, and we'll just watch for all these different behavioral changes.
So if somebody wanted to get involved with the organization, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our organization is helpingheroesusa.org. And they can just go to the website, they can contact us, they can enroll into one of our symposiums. Our symposiums are free, and they're paid for by us or we have sponsors. We have some great sponsors. And we're a nonprofit, so we continue to find sponsors and people that want to step up in the gap and help out. Just like you, I appreciate the fact that you're having me on so that we can move our message forward. So that if there's somebody out there that's listening that's either at risk themselves or knows somebody that's at risk, they can say, this is some good information. I'm going to follow up. I'm going to contact this organization. So that's what happens. And so people like you that are out there that are influencers that can help us move our message forward. I mean, I love it. It's just great exposure for us. Helps us get people to kind of perk up their radar and say, maybe there is somebody in my network, or yeah, I just talked to somebody the other day and they haven't seen them for a long time. They're not returning my phone calls, not returning my text messages. That's a red flag.
Yeah. So again, thank you for being on. But sitting here, I would be a liar if I told you I didn't have like dark thoughts in my head, at some point in my life. And for me, it was one person, right? It was my friend Drew, who he didn't even know, he was just there. Like I never voiced it to him. It never came out, but he was just there and just to support me through some rough times. And for me, that was enough.
Yeah, and that's great. There's a lot of stories like that where there's just been a subtlety where somebody started to go down the path, and then just a friend will say something or just be there, and it makes you realize that my life does have value and get you out of that funk, so to speak, that you're thinking of committing suicide. Years ago, I had a friend of mine that was involved with Gideons. Gideons are the people that put Bibles in hotel rooms. And there's a lot of stories. And I remember one story, he was telling me that he'd just gotten a letter from a lady who checked into a hotel. Sole purpose was to take her life. She saw the Gideon's Bible and she just started reading it. And she kept reading it, and she checked out of the hotel. And she felt like I need to contact the people that put the Bible there. That changed her mind. So sometimes it's you're not in it for the long haul. It's just letting somebody know you care. Sometimes it is a long haul process. There's some things that people that have heredity, that drugs and alcohol, and then maybe a suicide in their lineage, that somehow brings them there to that point. And that's a long haul to stay with and support those people. You don't need to try to do it. And this is a message that's really important. If you identify somebody and you have a conversation with them and you feel that they're at risk, you don't need to do it alone. You're not alone. There's other people that will support. There's organizations that will support, and you don't have to feel like, gee, it's just going to be such a burden. I don't want to do it.
So you had mentioned your symposiums, right? So are those offered just in person, or do you do them virtually as well? So, I'm not
Here's
really
what we're
sure how
doing
that
with
works.
the symposiums. They're events that we have, and we have one coming up in September 25th, and it's for the Association of Builders and Contractors, and we'll probably have about 75 people there. So it's done in person. We get to have some interaction. I like those the most. What we're doing is creating a webinar now, because we found that we just can't reach enough people with symposiums. You can't do it every day. You just can't reach enough people across the country. And so we're doing the webinars, and then I have a book coming out, like I mentioned before. It's called Silent Battle, and that's another way to just get our message out. And we have behind that, I've got a couple more books coming out. So we're looking at as many contact points as we can get to get people aware of there's a skill set involved. That's all. There's a skill set to be able to help and work with people. It's not a very complicated one, but again, it's just something that you can say, yeah, I know how to start the conversation. Yeah, I know how to listen. I see a friend of mine doing this, and I think they're at risk. And just be a little proactive, and that's what we're advocating. And we can affect the whole community that way. And I think that's it. Large populations of people. I think we mentioned this early on. There's a suicide every 11 minutes. And every time there's a suicide, there's like 135 people affected, co-workers, family, friends of friends. And in the military, the number is about 22 veterans a day, which is way too much, but we also think that's way underreported. As you dive down into the research and things like that, a lot of people think it's closer to 45 vets a day, which is just outrageous. So, working in that space, trying to mitigate those, reduce the amount of suicides there, that's one mission.
No, so what you're doing is very important because, I hear a lot of veterans who say that they do 22 push-ups a day for suicide awareness veterans, right? And I'm glad that they're doing that, but doesn't them doing push-ups didn't help me when I was at my lowest point. And so I think you helping people, providing the skills so they understand how to interact with somebody who might have thoughts of suicide, that's very important, because what you said earlier, there you can be judgmental in different ways, right? I've heard people say, "Oh, you don't want to think that way. Like, you have so much to live for." They mean well, but they're still passing judgment on
Right.
somebody, right?
No, you're absolutely right. It's one of the in our book we have a chart of like things that you don't say, and you have so much to live for is something that you don't say. That's a judgment, and that's not listening, and that's not finding out what it is that they feel that's just giving them no other choice. And a lot of times they feel like there's such a burden on people, um, and you just want to listen to that and just and support them and just think, well, how can we get you out of that? How can we help? How can we not have you feel like that? What would it make you not feel like that? It's a questioning process. It's almost like being an interviewer on podcast. You got to frame your questions and ask them, and then when you get an answer, you got to respond to that. And the thing is, if you care enough that you ask, and here's another point: is that sometimes there's people that are afraid, they don't want to start a conversation because they don't want to get into a confrontation. And that's a possibility. But if you do get in a confrontation, then at least you've identified that there is a risk. And then maybe that's the point where you get professional help to help you through this. But what I've found in my work here, I don't know, it's almost a decade, is that people just, once they start talking it through, what is it that's created that? There's this reoccurring things that happen in working with vets. And, I tell the story on, I was talking to a vet, and actually we were on our bikes and we were riding, and he was telling me that he was a medic and he was just deployed right into battle. And part of his training was that when there was casualties, was that he had to go along and assess where that casualty was, right? If that person was dead or alive, how urgent was it? And he was walking through a field and he looked at one casualty, and there was so much blood that he just assumed this person was dead. Never turned him over, never checked him. That night, it haunted him that he didn't know. And that kept happening over and over again. Now, we don't know what happened. We don't know if the person was dead or alive. We don't know what the outcome was. But for him, it was a constant thing that haunted him. And he needed to talk to that more and more. He needed to get some help. But nobody knew around him because he didn't want to tell anybody about that. He felt guilty about it. Nobody in the circle really knew about it, And so until he could really get some help was to say, express that and say, this is something that is really, really, I just can't shake it. It keeps happening over and over again. It's a reoccurring dream. We talked about, sometimes in the military, you're asked to do something that goes against your core value. And you come back, and then that's something that I really didn't want to do that. I did that. I don't feel good about doing it. And I need to get out of that. So again, I guess I can't stress enough is that the listening part, the caring part, is really what makes the difference. And then knowing where to get help and knowing where to get support. So that's our mission. It's pretty simple. I'm a pretty simple guy, so that's what we do.
That's important, because you're making it sound easy that anybody can do it, but there. I think people need a little bit of instruction. Just because you watch things on television and you ask somebody, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" and they just open it up, and you live happily ever after, and that's
Yeah, right.
that's not reality.
Right.
So sometimes people, you might have to ask a few times. Not one day you ask, and 2 days later, or the next day you ask. It all depends on the person. Not everybody's going to react the same.
I agree. I agree with that. I think that's a good observation. I think that you may, you don't want to ask somebody what's wrong with them. That's that's judgmental,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
but you might want to say something like, are you okay? Or or do you seem down? Do you feel like you're down a little bit? And they may know, no, it's okay. But then you come back again another day and ask again. One of the things about engaging in the conversation, we talk about this, is to be able to pick a time, the right time to engage in a conversation. Okay, so someplace maybe where it's quiet, someplace where the TV's off, somewhere they're not doing something else, somewhere where you're not going to be interrupted, and someplace they feel safe. So just don't all of a sudden think, well, that's it, and then you start your conversation and you get interrupted. I can remember having a conversation one time, being in a car and driving and asking somebody and getting into a dialogue because it's safe. Same thing when you're riding on a bike next to somebody. You're out in the middle of the desert and you're on a bike and you're talking and it's safe. So if you're going to ask somebody, if you think they're at risk, pick the right time to enter into that conversation. Certainly don't do it when they're exasperated. Maybe do it in the morning before they get all worked up throughout the day and depressed. Um, so timing. So these are little skills. Skills can be learned, and this is what we teach. I'm an ex football coach. That's how I started off my life as a football coach. And so there's talent and there's skills, and people just have natural talent sometimes, and skills are something you can learn. So we're into giving skills to people. You know how to identify, how to engage, how to refer them out.
Yeah, definitely. Because some of the people I worked with in the military, they have very good skills. They can, they know how to speak to people. They can be subtle about it, not press. And then I've worked with other people that'll just come straight out. It's like, are you going to kill yourself? It's like, maybe that's not the appropriate, you know, approach at that particular time. So yeah, I think, you know, just a little bit of teaching, little humility. Like, yeah, I want to help people, but maybe I should learn the proper skills or the proper way to go about it. Which leads me to you mentioned your book, right? Um, if somebody's interested in that, where can they purchase it?
Well, it'll be out in about 2 weeks. It's going to be everywhere. It'll be at all the platforms, Amazon, and all those Barnes and Noble, all that. Um, there's a website that right now takes you to our website. It's called silentbattle.life. So that might be easier for people to remember than helpingheroesusa.org. Um, you know, uh, One of the areas that you hit on was that when people in the military, in combat, or even in drills, we have a lot of people that have TBI, traumatic brain injury, and that supports PTSD. And when somebody may not notice it right away, or they may have problems with their memory, cognitive thinking, things like that, and they actually have TBI. And that's where, if you notice that somebody is having problems, all of a sudden they can't remember, you can get them help. Get them because they're at risk, because that will start depression because you just can't remember things. You just can't function the way you used to function. And so for first responders, uh, military, large sounds going off can create a concussion, which can lead to TBI. So we want to make people aware of that too. There might not be a physical injury, but there is an injury, and TBI can be detected just by an X-ray. Uh, you know, an MRI, they can find out if you have TBI, and once you know you have it, then it's easier to deal with what's going on with you. It's like if you're sick and you don't know what it is, then you find out it's something, and you go, okay, now I know what I've got, I can deal with it and work through it. So those are some things that we talk about also. We talk about in the book, we talk about in the symposium.
Yeah, no, that's great because during my military career, had 5 concussions on 5 different occasions.
Yeah.
Um, and my wife, to this day, my memory is still affected. And my wife, she's there. She's very patient. She helps me out, and But you're right. I think at the height of my bad feelings was after my fifth concussion.
Now, you see, and there's so many, you know, especially if you're an athlete, then you go in and you get concussion while you're in the military, but you brought a few in. Um, things like kids hitting balls in soccer,
Yeah.
creating concussions, and enough of those will lead to TBI. Myself, through my football career, I had 7 concussions, and then I had a cycling crash where they just found me out in the street, laying on the street unconscious. And so I had TBI, I have TBI. And I found ways to brain train, to get involved in doing different brain exercises to bring my memory back. That was the first thing that I noticed right away. I couldn't, somebody told me a phone number, I couldn't remember the area code, and so that was one of my things that went off for me. But there's different things online. There's a lot of brain games online. There's things that you can do to exercise that, to try to get that back. And I feel like I've gotten back my memory where it's not a problem anymore, but it was problematic for me initially. Just, I just couldn't, function. That can be depressing. And then we get into that whole cycle of depression, that we need to keep people out of. So, but you're absolutely right that and once somebody in your family knows, I mean, your wife knows that maybe you have PTSD or TBI, it's easier for them to cope because they know, that you're not intentionally doing this, but you're suffering from something.
Yeah, and to touch on that, so if you're listening, you can have PTSD. You don't have to be in the military for PTSD. It could be just a traumatic event. And but for me, what was important, my family didn't know what that meant. They thought that it was like you get your cut on your arm and it heals and it basically goes away. It's like it's not really how PTSD works.
Right.
And so just
And there's all
explaining to
degrees
them
of
how.
it. There's all degrees. There's
Yeah.
degrees that are so severe and so frequent that, and that's where people try to self-medicate, and that becomes a problem. But then there's also where you're just on the outside of the spectrum, but you have it, and emotionally you're up and down, or you get angry and you can't, but you're not fully vested. Let's say that you have PTSD. So we find that, I know that working with some guys, um, horrific attacks, have to put a blanket over their head, have to get them in a room, have to sit with them while it's quiet. It's terrible and extreme attacks of PTSD. And then on the other hand, there's just some little flare-ups for some people. So it's hard. I think it's hard for people around you, but if they understand a little bit, if they kind of get the concept and see what's going on, it's a lot easier when you see somebody has a big physical wound. Then you can see the problem, right? You can see what's going on for them. But these emotional wounds that are just tough, and they're tough that people don't recognize that you have that.
So earlier you were talking about some of the symposiums are going to transition to webinars. Can people go onto your website and register for the webinars?
We're probably about 2 weeks away from launching our first webinar.
Okay.
What's happened with our company, with Helping Heroes USA, is when I've done this, we've done it mostly on veteran sites, veteran organizations, and then we decided to open it up to the public. We looked at the whole thing, and I just felt like we're not reaching enough people. It just can't be peer to peer. We need to reach more people. So this is really new for us, launching out and going into other organizations and going more to the general public. We're moving. Now, we do have veterans and first responders involved in our organizations, but I would say by the middle of October, everything will be on the site, be up and running. The webinars will be going. We'll be getting the information out. And we just want to empower as many people as we can. We want to reach as many people as we can in the community. We're also working like with this Association of Builders and Contractors. We're working with organizations that have populations that are at high risk and going in and doing things there. There's also a lot of coalitions around the country that are suicide prevention, but they're a lot of information driven. A lot of the money that's been spent over the years by the government, by grants, have been to do research and to produce literature and produce some information, but nothing hands-on where people can talk and interact. A lot of statistical data is out there, which is good, but it doesn't teach you how to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Okay? So we're looking at that void, and we're working with a lot of these different coalitions. We're working at Riverside, California has a great coalition, and actually we're going to have them speak at our next symposium and share some of the things they have. So there's another section of this, which is if you're a caregiver, I'll call you a caregiver, your friend that's working with you, talking to you, and supporting you, and that person they're working with actually does die by suicide. We now need to work with the person that was the caregiver because now they become at risk. They have a lot of guilt. They have a lot of feeling of failure. And so we're also working, that's a whole other way to work with people, you know, and but it's part of this whole spectrum. It's part of the whole thing.
Yeah, no. So I worked in construction. I was a project manager in construction for about a year, and I didn't realize. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? But that's a very stressful job. It can pay well, yeah, but I don't think people understand. Like, if it rains or if the weather doesn't permit, then people don't work, and if you don't work, you don't get paid, and so that can be very stressful for people.
It's true. You know, the other thing is one of the things we have down here in the desert is that when it gets to a certain the temperature, they have to stop. So what happens is but you can't start early in the morning. I think you're going to start at 7 o'clock. So you could come in, you could drive in to work for 2 hours, work for 3 hours, and then have to stop. That creates a lot of stress and anxiety for guys too, you know. So again, there's a lot of factors to look at, and that's why certain populations are more at risk. But again, unfortunately, suicide knows no boundaries. You know, it's across the board. It affects lives. Um, you know, and you get emails all the time, or you talk to people who have had somebody close, and working with people that have had somebody close to them is difficult because there's a skill factor. And we'd like to eliminate the saying, you know, if I only knew, if I only knew, you know, so we're trying to make people aware so you know.
Yeah, coming out of the military, I wanted to do something to help people out. But again, just coming right out of the military was a little harder, and it was difficult to speak to people. And for me, what I found helped me was I found it just a core group of guys that I trusted, and just with their support, it's been easier just to, I guess, branch out, just talk to people, just to see how they're doing or checking in on them. Because I found that there are a lot of guys out there who their transition was difficult and nobody's checked on them. The friends that they had while they were in are no longer there. And so
No,
just reaching
that's
out
true.
helps.
Yeah, there's that, and I mean, you're right on the right path. Is if people can get and just have somebody that they can have some commonality with and stay engaged, not going into isolation, not going into depressions, you know, those are just really keys right there. And so, you know, you found it organically. You know, you had this group that you worked with, and I think that's just great. That's what we just want to encourage people to. It doesn't matter what you do, you know. Like I said, we've done golf clinics, golf tournaments, cycling events, pickleball, all kinds of things. But then we have guys that just hang out and have breakfast. And that's fine too. And so
Yeah.
it's that group uh, feeling part of a group, not feeling isolated. Maybe having where you can share. I mean, everybody's got things going on in their life that they'd like to share with someone.
So I think you brought up a very good point. Like, right, people just want to be around other people. They want to share things. But when you're a kid, it's a little easier because you have to go to school, right? So you're in a room together. You're required to be in that room together. So you're
Right.
going to make friends. your parents put you in sports, whether you want to or not, right? You're going to try out for the soccer team or the baseball team. So you're going to make friends. But when you're an adult, well, now you have a choice, right? Do I hang out with people? Do I not? Like, what's the difference between a coworker and a friend? I don't know,
Yeah.
but for some people, it's hard just to reach out, just to try to make a friend or some sort of connection with someone.
Well, broaden your circle of acquaintances.
Yep.
I'll tell you what's difficult for guys. When the wife passes, typically the wife is a social influence in the relationship, right? They have more contacts. They've brought up the kids, and the kids have had friends, and the husband's always off. The wife passes away, and now this guy's completely isolated. He's got nobody. He's got all those people who are really his wife's friends. Not that they're not his friends, but he just doesn't know how to interact. And so that's why the male, one of the reasons why the male population is a higher number, a higher rate of suicides. The bad news is that we've seen in the last couple of years a 4% increase in women committing suicide. There's been an increase. There's been an increase in seniors. We deal a lot with them losing a loved one. You also deal with chronic pain. And with youth, there's isolation. The good news and the bad news about the internet is that it's gotten information out, but it also gets people from socializing, in
Yeah.
face to face. They're off someplace and they're not really interfacing with anybody. So those are some of the things. Those are all the things, and we're all aware of them. We just need to really start paying attention and saying somebody might be at risk, or if you're at risk, if you feel yourself. The message I always want to give out and kind of end with this message is if you yourself feel yourself getting isolated and you feel that some of these things are a problem, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody, buddy up with somebody. It's a reaching out. You'll find the right person.
Okay, Tony. So we're about at that time. But before we go, one, I want to say thank you again for coming on and talking about this because this is a topic that is very near and dear to me. I don't think we can talk about it enough or promote it enough. But again, can you just tell us the name of your book, so
Sure.
anybody who might be interested in it?
Yeah. The name of the book coming out, it's Silent Battle, and it's really written in a way to uh, families, friends, acquaintances, and how to deal with heroes. We call heroes are people that are veterans that are come back. We talk about first responders. We talk about law enforcement. They're really heroes. There's people that put on the line, and how to work with them, and how to support them, and how to be a family or be a loved one, be a support person. That's kind of the bent, the way the book is written. And but if somebody is out there at risk, there's a lot of good information for them to maybe set them on a different path than death by suicide. So the website, where there's a lot of information, it's helpingheroesusa.org. And if you want to reach out to me and you go there and log on, there's a way to get to me, and I'd be glad to talk to anybody at risk, or if somebody knows somebody at risk.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for coming
Hey,
on.
thank you. I appreciate you supporting us and helping us get our message out and moving our message forward. I really do. It's things like this that allow us to get out and reach more people. And that's what this is all about. Thank you so much, Antonio, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you again. All right, everyone. Until next time, remember, zot, 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 and roll tide.